At my wife's party, her coworker mocked me in front of everyone. The guest smiled. I smiled back. He had no idea I already had everything I needed to burn his world down, and I was in no rush to strike the match. My name is Winston Keene. I'm 43 years old, and I run a mid-sized media production company in Nashville, Tennessee. Podcasts, live events, brand storytelling. We've built something solid over the past decade. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines but keeps the lights on for 22 employees and their families. I'm proud of that. I married Priya when I was 31. She was 27, sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood its geometry. We had 2 kids, Jonah, now 13, all elbows and quiet intensity, and Nora, 9 years old and the loudest person in any building she enters. For 12 years, I thought we were a team. I was wrong. The night it all broke open, and I don't mean metaphorically, I mean the night the foundation actually shifted beneath my feet, was at Priya's company mixer at the Meridian rooftop downtown. Her employer, a mid-sized brand consultancy called ArcLight Creative, threw these quarterly events. Clients, partners, staff, plus ones. The usual curated crowd of people pretending to like each other while hunting for their next opportunity. I'd been to 4 of these before. They were tolerable if you found the right corner and nursed a decent drink. That night, I found neither. I arrived late. A live event ran long across town, and I drove straight there. Priya was already in the middle of the room, laughing with a group near the bar. She looked good. She always looked good at these things, like she saved a version of herself for public consumption that I rarely got to see at home anymore. I grabbed a drink, loosened my collar, and started making my way toward her. That's when I saw him for the first time. Zane Whitfield, 45, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who wore confidence like a tailored jacket. He stood close to Priya, closer than a colleague has any business standing, and had his hand resting on the bar, just inches from hers. Not touching, just near. The way a man stands when he's already decided something, but is still pretending it's undecided. Priya introduced us without missing a beat. Winston, this is Zane. He's been consulting with our team on the Harlow account. Zane extended his hand and looked at me the way a man looks at a speed bump. Something to note, then moved past. Heard a lot about you, he said, his grip just a beat too firm. The podcast guy, right? I smiled. Among other things. He tilted his head and glanced around the room with the easy arrogance of someone who'd never once doubted his own welcome. Must be a good gig. Low overhead. High margins if you know what you're doing. He paused, then added with a small grin aimed directly at the people standing nearby, though I guess it depends on whether anyone's actually listening. The group around us went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then someone laughed, a short, polite, uncomfortable laugh, and a few others looked away. Priya's smile didn't waver, but her eyes cut sideways for just a fraction of a moment. I caught it. I stood there holding my drink, watching the guests hide their reactions behind sips and sideways glances, and I understood exactly what had just happened. He'd done it deliberately. In front of her colleagues, her clients, her world, he had taken a shot at me just to see how I'd land. I set my glass down slowly and looked at him. You're right, I said, even and unhurried. It does depend on whether anyone's listening. Lucky for me, they are. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he smiled, broader this time, like he'd gotten what he came for, and turned back to the group. I didn't say another word to him that night. I didn't need to. What I needed was to think, because something in the way Priya hadn't defended me, hadn't even blinked, sat in my chest like a splinter. On the drive home, Nora called from her grandmother's house asking if we'd remembered to tape her Saturday cartoons. I said yes, even though I hadn't. Jonah was already asleep when we got in. Priya went to the bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, still in my jacket. The splinter had become a question, and questions like that don't let you sleep. I gave it 3 days before I did anything. 3 days of watching, listening, keeping my face neutral while my mind worked overtime. Priya didn't notice. That told me something too. On the 4th day, I hired a private investigator. His name was Roy Bassett, mid-50s, former Metro Nashville detective, the kind of man who looked like he'd seen everything twice and stopped being surprised the first time. A colleague had used him in a business dispute 2 years back and vouched for him without hesitation. I called Roy on a Tuesday morning from my car outside the office and told him I needed discreet surveillance on a person of interest connected to my wife. He asked two questions. How long did I want coverage? And did I want photos or full documentation? I said full documentation. He said he'd start Thursday. I felt something shift in me after that call. Not relief. More like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes and you know what's coming even if you can't see it yet. Thursday came. Friday. Roy sent me a check-in message Saturday afternoon. Good movement. Talk Monday. Monday morning, I was in his office on Demonbrun Street by 8:30. Roy set a manila folder on the desk between us, opened it, and slid out 3 printed photographs without ceremony. Zane Whitfield and Priya. A coffee shop on Elliston Place. Tuesday afternoon. She'd told me she had a client lunch downtown. A parking garage on 4th Avenue. Thursday evening. She'd told me she was working late. And the third photo, the one that closed the door on every remaining doubt I had, the two of them at what looked like a hotel lobby bar, Friday night, while I was home helping Nora with a school project on the water cycle. I sat with those photographs for a long moment. Roy didn't rush me. How long have you known this guy? He asked finally. Met him 10 days ago, I said. He works with her firm. Roy nodded slowly. He's been careful. Mostly. But not careful enough. He tapped the folder. There's more in there. Phone records from a data request. Some financial stuff you might find interesting. I looked up. Financial. Roy leaned back. Your wife made several transfers in the last 4 months from a joint account. Small amounts. 800 here, 1,000 there. To a business consulting invoice. Vendor listed as ZW Advisory Group. I stared at him. ZW, I said. Zane Whitfield, Roy confirmed, and his expression didn't change at all. I drove back to the office with the folder on the passenger seat and my jaw tight enough to ache. She hadn't just been seeing him. She'd been funding him. Out of our money. The anger that came up wasn't hot. It was cold and very, very clear. That afternoon I called my attorney, Douglas Holt. Doug was 61, methodical, and had handled 2 of my business contracts and 1 trademark dispute over the years. He was not a family lawyer by trade, but he knew everyone who was. Within the hour, he'd refer me to a colleague who specialized in asset protection and divorce proceedings. And by end of day, I had an appointment for Wednesday. But before Wednesday, something happened that changed the shape of everything. I came home that evening to find Nora sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and Jonah parked on the couch with his headphones on. Normal enough. What wasn't normal was the voice I heard coming from Priya's home office down the hall. Low, easy, unmistakably male. I walked to the doorway. Priya was on a video call, laptop open, back half turned to the door. On the screen, Zane Whitfield, in what looked like a home office, relaxed and smiling. She sensed me before she heard me. Her shoulders stiffened. I'll call you back, she said to the screen, and closed the laptop in one motion. She turned in her chair and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her before. Not guilt, exactly. More like calculation. Like she was already 3 moves ahead and deciding which one to play. Work call, she said. I didn't answer. I looked at the closed laptop, then back at her. Dinner's in 20 minutes, I said, and walked back down the hall. I sat at the table and helped Nora with her multiplication tables while the kitchen timer counted down, and my mind ran through every conversation I needed to have in the next 30 days. Not with Priya. Not yet. With lawyers. With accountants. With Roy Bassett, who I planned to call first thing tomorrow morning. Because Zane Whitfield was about to find out that looking at me like a speed bump was the most expensive mistake he'd ever make. Douglas Holt called me Tuesday morning before I'd even made coffee. Winston, I need you to come in today. Not Wednesday. Today. I was in his office on Charlotte Avenue by 10. Doug was already standing when I walked in, which was unusual. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and closed the door himself instead of asking his assistant to do it. Roy Bassett called me last night, he said, settling into his chair and folding his hands on the desk. He wanted to give you a heads up through me rather than directly. Professional courtesy, he said. I waited. Doug exhaled slowly. Roy received a call 4 days ago from Zane Whitfield's personal attorney. They were fishing, trying to find out if anyone had retained Roy recently for domestic surveillance work. They didn't name you specifically, but Roy said the timing and the description they used were close enough that he wanted you to know immediately. I sat very still. Whitfield knows someone's watching him. He suspects, Doug corrected. There's a difference, but it means he's been careful enough to notice something, or someone tipped him. He paused. Roy is confident his methods were clean. But he can't rule out that Priya noticed a behavioral change in you and said something. I thought about the video call I'd walked in on. Priya closing the laptop. The look on her face. Not guilt, but calculation. She said something. I said flatly. Doug nodded once. Roy's recommendation is to pull back on active surveillance immediately and shift to document collection only. No more physical tailing. Everything through financial records, communication subpoenas, and what you can legally access from shared accounts. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then I looked at Doug. Fine. Pull Roy back. But I want everything he has documented and preserved today. Already done, Doug said. There's one more thing. He opened a folder and turned it toward me. Roy flagged something before he pulled back. ZW Advisory Group. The consulting vendor Priya's been paying? Roy ran it through the state business registry. It was registered 8 months ago. One member LLC. Registered agent is a man named Dale Whitfield. Doug tapped the page. Zane's younger brother. I stared at the registration document. The address listed was a UPS store on West End Avenue. It's a shell, I said. Almost certainly, Doug replied. Which means those transfers aren't consulting fees. They're personal payments routed through a fake business entity. That's not a marital issue anymore, Winston. That's potentially wire fraud. I drove back to the office with both hands on the wheel and my mind running clean and fast, the way it does when I'm producing a live event, and 3 things go wrong simultaneously, and I have to triage in real time. No panic, just sequencing. First, protect the finances. I called our accountant from the parking garage and had him flag every joint account for monitoring and begin the process of separating my business assets from personal ones. Second, the kids. I called my mother in Brentwood and asked if Jonah and Nora could stay with her the coming weekend. She didn't ask why. She said of course and told me to eat something. Third, Zane Whitfield's upcoming event. I'd seen it on LinkedIn 3 days earlier, a live showcase he was hosting for brand partners and potential investors. A media innovation evening at a venue on 5th Avenue North. 70 guests, catered, presentation heavy. The kind of event where reputations either get built or buried. I had contacts in the Nashville media production world that Zane couldn't begin to match. One of them, a tech coordinator named Felix who did AV setup for half the city's corporate events, confirmed he'd been hired for Zane's showcase. Felix owed me 2 favors from a festival we'd co-produced in 2021. I called him one of them. I didn't ask Felix to do anything dishonest. I asked him to give me access to the event's presentation upload system for 30 minutes the night before the showcase, using the admin credentials the venue used for all their client events. Credentials that, as it turned out, Zane had set using his own birthday. Felix mentioned it offhand with the kind of contempt only a tech professional can summon for that level of carelessness. I built my version of Slide 6 at home, at my kitchen table, after the kids were asleep. No graphic content. No rage. Just time-stamped emails, 2 photographs from Roy's documentation, and a clean screenshot of the ZW Advisory Group registration with Dale Whitfield's name highlighted. Factual. Surgical. Undeniable. I uploaded it at 11:14 on a Thursday night, sitting in a quiet house while Jonah's bedroom light glowed faintly under his door. Then I made myself a cup of coffee, sat back down at the table, and waited for the next day to arrive. The showcase was held on a Friday evening. I arrived at 6:45, signed in under a name that wasn't mine, accepted a name badge and a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and found a position near the back wall with a clear sight line to the presentation screen. The room was everything Zane had designed it to be: dim, warm, expensive looking. 80 people in tailored clothes telling each other how interesting they were. A string quartet played in the corner, which was either sophisticated or overreaching depending on your tolerance for that sort of thing. Zane took the stage at 7:15. He was smooth, I'd give him that. He had the cadence of a man who'd given this particular speech in his head 1,000 times and finally got to say it out loud. Slide 1, vision. Slide 2, market opportunity. Slide 3, the portfolio. Slide 4, growth projections. Slide 5, client testimonials, all glowing, all carefully selected. Then slide 6. The transition happened mid-sentence. Zane was saying something about strategic partnerships when the screen behind him changed. The room shifted in the way rooms shift when the temperature drops suddenly. Not dramatically, just noticeably. A few people leaned forward. Someone in the third row turned to the person beside them. A woman near the bar stopped mid-sip. I watched Zane turn, watched him read the screen, watched his posture change in real time, the shoulders dropping a fraction, the jaw setting, the easy confidence draining out of him like water through a broken seal. In the front row, a silver-haired man in a dark suit stood up without a word, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the exit. I'd done my research. That was Gerald Whitfield, Zane's father, the man who'd bankrolled the first 2 years of his son's consulting business. He didn't look at Zane as he passed. That image, a father walking out on his son without a backward glance, was the one I carried with me as I slipped out the side door before the room fully understood what it had just witnessed. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I walked 2 blocks to where I'd parked, got in, and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Priya. I set it face down on the passenger seat. There was still a great deal left to do. Attorneys, court filings, conversations I wasn't looking forward to. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Solid, like a man standing on ground that belonged to him. I started the car and drove home to my children. My mother didn't ask questions. That was one of the things I'd always loved about her. She opened her front door in Brentwood on a Saturday morning, looked at my face for exactly 2 seconds, and then looked past me at Jonah and Nora climbing out of the back seat. "Who wants pancakes shaped like animals?" she called out over my shoulder. Nora sprinted up the porch steps without answering, which was answer enough. Jonah followed at his usual measured pace, hands in his hoodie pocket, but I caught the small upward pull at the corner of his mouth. I carried their bags inside, kissed my mother on the cheek, and told her I'd be back Sunday evening. She squeezed my arm once, tight, brief, and let me go without a word. I drove back to the city with the windows down and the radio off. The apartment I'd rented 3 days earlier was a furnished 2-bedroom on the east side of town, the kind of place that smelled like new carpet and other people's decisions. Not home, but it was mine, and right now that distinction mattered more than comfort. I spent Saturday morning at my desk with every financial document I'd gathered spread across the table in front of me. Account statements going back 18 months. The ZW Advisory Group registration. Roy Bassett's full documentation package. A printout of every transfer Priya had made that I could trace, totaling $4,200 across 7 transactions. Small enough to go unnoticed. Large enough to matter. I photographed everything, encrypted the files, and sent copies to Doug Holt's secure server. Then I called him. "The fraud angle," I said when he picked up. "How solid is it?" Doug was quiet for a moment. "Solid enough to raise in proceedings. Wire fraud through a shell entity is a serious charge. Whether the DA pursues it is their call, but the documentation makes a compelling case." He paused. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," I said. "What do I need to do next on the custody side?" He referred me again to his colleague, a family attorney named Patricia Vane, who I'd spoken with once already. I called her next. Patricia was direct and unhurried, which I appreciated. She told me to begin a detailed log of my parenting involvement, dates, activities, who was present, and to do it going back as far as I could accurately remember. She also told me something that landed harder than I expected. If she moves to restrict your access before you file, Patricia said, it becomes a longer road. File first. File Monday. I filed Monday. That Sunday, I drove out to my mother's house to pick up the kids. Nora ran out to the car with a crayon drawing she'd made for the new apartment. A house with a crooked chimney and 4 stick figures out front, one of which appeared to be holding a microphone. She told me that one was me, because I make podcasts. I folded it carefully and put it in the glove compartment. Jonah waited until Nora was inside before he spoke. He leaned against the passenger door with his arms crossed and looked at me in the flat, evaluating way he had that sometimes made me feel like I was being interviewed. "Dad," he said, "are you and Mom getting divorced?" I looked at him directly. He deserved that much. "I don't know yet," I said. "But things are changing, and I want you to hear from me that none of it is your fault, and none of it changes anything about you and me." "Understood." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, pushed off the door, and got in the car. I stood there for a second before getting in myself. 13 years old, and already carrying himself like someone who'd made peace with hard news. I didn't know whether to be proud of that or grieve it. I chose both. The call started on a Tuesday. First, it was a brand partner I'd worked with for 3 years, a mid-size outdoor gear company that had renewed their podcast sponsorship with us twice. Their marketing director, a usually warm woman named Cheryl, called to say they were pausing the renewal conversation. She sounded uncomfortable. When I pressed her gently, she admitted that someone had reached out to their team with concerns about my professional stability and recent erratic behavior. She wouldn't say who. I thanked her calmly, ended the call, and sat in my office with the door closed for about 4 minutes. Then I called Roy Bassett. "I need you back on," I said. "Different scope. I want to know who Zane Whitfield has been contacting in my professional network in the last 2 weeks." Roy said he'd see what he could find through legitimate channels. LinkedIn activity, mutual contacts willing to talk, any documented outreach that could be traced. He called back within 48 hours. Zane had contacted 4 people in my professional circle. 1 podcast host I co-produced with for years, 2 brand partners, and a venue manager I used regularly for live events. The message varied slightly in each case, but carried the same spine. Winston Keene was going through something personal that was affecting his judgment, and they might want to reconsider any upcoming commitments. He hadn't used his own name in all of them. 2 of the outreaches came through a third party, a mutual contact type arrangement designed to look like organic concern rather than deliberate sabotage. It was sophisticated, and it made me genuinely angry for the first time since all of this started. I spent 2 days building a defamation file. Every contact Zane had reached out to, I called personally. I didn't attack him. I simply told each person directly that I was aware of a coordinated effort to damage my professional reputation and that I intended to pursue legal remedies. I asked each of them if they'd be willing to document what they'd been told and who had told them. 3 of the 4 said yes immediately. The 4th said they needed to think about it, which was honest and fine. Doug Holt connected me with a litigation attorney named Carl Briggs who handled defamation cases. Carl reviewed the file on a Thursday morning and told me we had a strong foundation for a civil suit. He sent Zane's attorney a formal cease and desist that afternoon. The response came back within 24 hours. A thinly worded denial that essentially admitted the contact had happened while arguing they were protected opinion rather than actionable defamation. Carl called it the legal equivalent of a man caught red-handed claiming he was just admiring the merchandise. I authorized him a file. That evening, I picked up Jonah and Nora from school. On the drive home, Nora told me in exhaustive detail about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over which animal would win in a race between a cheetah and a motorcycle. Jonah stared out the window and occasionally offered a single-word verdict when asked. Normal. Mercifully, stubbornly normal. At home, I helped Nora with reading, reviewed Jonah's history project, and made spaghetti for dinner. After the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and spent an hour going through the financial documentation one more time, looking for anything I'd missed. That's when I found it. Buried in a statement from 14 months ago, a transfer I'd originally flagged as a household expense was a payment of $1,800 to an entity called Luminary Brand Partners. I searched the name. The registered agent was the same UPS store on West End Avenue as ZW Advisory Group. Different name, same address, same brother. Zane had been running at least 2 shell entities drawing from our accounts. The total, when I added it up, was just over $6,000. I forwarded it to Doug without a single word of commentary. The documentation spoke well enough for itself. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on my kids before I went to bed. The message came through on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing contract revisions at my desk. Not a call, a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the name at the end of the message made it unmistakable. You and me. Saturday morning. Centennial Park, East Pavilion, 9 a.m. No lawyers, no cameras, no audience. Just a conversation between 2 men. Come alone or don't come at all. Zane. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down and finished the paragraph I was working on before I let myself think about it. The rational response was obvious. Ignore it, forward it to Doug, let the attorneys add it to the file. That's what a careful man does. That's what a man protecting his legal position does. I thought about the way Zane had looked at me at that rooftop mixer. The hand near Pri is on the bar. The podcast guy comment aimed at the room. The 4 professional contacts he'd poisoned. The $6,000 funneled out of my household through shell companies with his brother's name on them. I texted back one word, fine. Saturday morning, I drove to Centennial Park in jeans and a jacket, parked on the west side, and walked the long way around to give myself time to think. The park was quiet at that hour. A few joggers, a woman walking two dogs, an older man reading on a bench. Nashville in early autumn, cool enough for a jacket, the kind of morning that felt clean and uncomplicated. Zane was already at the pavilion when I arrived. He was standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking out toward the replica Parthenon like he was posing for something. He turned when he heard my footsteps on the path. "Didn't think you'd show," he said. "Here I am," I replied, and stopped about 6 feet away. He studied me for a moment. Some of the easy arrogance from the rooftop mixer was still there, but underneath it something had shifted. The lawsuit had reached him. The cease and desist had reached him. Gerald Whitfield, walking out of his own son's showcase, had apparently reached the family in ways that were still reverberating. "I want this to stop," he said. "The legal stuff, the filings, all of it." I looked at him steadily. "Then you should have thought about that before you ran a shell company out of my bank account." His jaw tightened. "That was Priya's idea. Then Priya will answer for it separately," I said, "and so will you." He took a step forward. His voice dropped, and the pretense of civility went with it. "You think you're the first guy this has happened to? You think dragging this into court makes you look strong? It makes you look like a man who couldn't keep his wife interested." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at him the way I look at a microphone when the feed drops mid-recording, calm, assessing, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "You came here to rattle me," I said. "That's not a conversation. That's a last move from a man who's out of options." Something shifted in his face then, a flash of something raw, and he closed the remaining distance between us fast. His hand came up toward my collar, and I didn't step back. I caught his wrist, turned my hip into him, and we went sideways into the pavilion railing with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. It lasted maybe 8 seconds. A jogger who'd been coming up the path shouted something and broke into a run toward us. An older man from a nearby bench was already on his feet, moving our direction. Zane and I separated. Not because either of us was done, but because 2 people were suddenly between us with hands out, voices raised, asking what was happening. Zane straightened his jacket. A small cut at the corner of his lip was already showing. He looked at me across the 2 people standing between us with something I hadn't seen on his face before. Not amusement, not contempt, just the flat recognition of a man who finally understood he'd miscalculated. "We're done here," I said to the jogger and the older man. "Thank you." I turned and walked back up the path the way I'd come. My knuckle was scraped where it had caught the railing. I flexed my hand twice and kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my phone showed a missed call from Doug. I called him back immediately and told him exactly what had happened, start to finish, without omission. He listened without interrupting. "The text message constitutes evidence of him initiating contact," Doug said when I finished. "Document the physical contact in writing today, photograph your hand, and send it to me. Don't contact him again under any circumstances." "Already planned," I said. There was a brief pause. "Winston, are you all right?" I looked out through the windshield at the park, at the jogger who'd intervened, now stretching against a bench 50 yards away, at the ordinary Saturday morning continuing around me like nothing had happened. "Yeah," I said. "I'm all right." And I meant it. The custody hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after the Centennial Park incident. By then, the defamation suit against Zane was filed, the fraud documentation had been handed to Doug for potential referral to the DA's office, and Patricia Vane had assembled what she described as a thorough and compelling parenting record on my behalf. Priya had retained her own family attorney, a man named Stuart Colby who had a reputation for aggressive pre-hearing maneuvering. True to form, Colby submitted a supplemental declaration 4 days before the hearing claiming I had been volatile and threatening in recent weeks and citing my behavior as grounds for limiting my parenting time. Patricia read it to me over the phone in a tone so deliberately neutral that I could tell she was working to contain her own reaction. "He's going to put a witness on the stand," she said, "a woman named Donna Fielding. She's listed as a friend of Priya's who claims to have witnessed you speaking aggressively to the children at a school pickup in September." I sat very still. September. I ran through every school pickup in September in my head like a film editor scrubbing through footage. "That didn't happen," I said. "I know," Patricia replied. "So let's prove it." What Donna Fielding apparently hadn't considered was that Jonah's school had recently installed exterior security cameras covering the pickup lane. Patricia submitted a formal request for the footage through the school's administrative office. The principal, a methodical woman named Dr. Karen Foley, reviewed the request, confirmed the footage existed and was retained for 90 days, and provided it with quiet efficiency. The footage showed me at pickup on every date in September. Calm, present, Nora climbing into the car and immediately talking. Jonah adjusting his backpack straps before getting in the exact same way every single time. No raised voices. No aggression. Nothing resembling what Donna Fielding had described. Patricia also presented 12 months of school event attendance records. Jonah's teacher's written statement describing me as consistently engaged and supportive, and Nora's pediatric appointment log showing I had accompanied her to 4 of the last 5 visits. The hearing itself was held in a quiet courtroom on a gray Tuesday morning. Priya sat at the opposite table in a charcoal blazer, her expression composed. We didn't look at each other when I entered. Donna Fielding took the stand and described the alleged incident with the rehearsed specificity of someone who'd been coached. Patricia's cross-examination was methodical and unhurried. She established the date, the time, the specific location. Then she asked Donna whether she was aware that the school had installed exterior cameras covering the pickup area. Donna blinked. I wasn't sure about that. Patricia submitted the footage. The judge, a compact woman named the Honorable Frances Aldridge, watched it in full without expression. Then she looked at Donna Fielding for a long moment without speaking. Colby objected to the footage on procedural grounds. Judge Aldridge overruled him in a tone that suggested she found the objection unpersuasive and mildly irritating. When Donna stepped down, she didn't look at Priya. Patricia presented the full parenting record. Colby attempted to reframe several entries as evidence of overcompensation following marital breakdown, which Judge Aldridge acknowledged and then set aside with a single sentence. Engaged parenting is engaged parenting, counsel, regardless of its timing relative to marital proceedings. Colby's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went flat. The ruling on temporary custody came down 40 minutes after the hearing concluded. Primary physical custody to Winston Keene, pending full proceedings. Scheduled parenting time for Priya. A requirement that neither parent make changes to the children's school, medical, or extracurricular arrangements without mutual agreement or court approval. Patricia called me with the ruling while I was sitting in my car in the courthouse parking garage. I listened to her read it through and didn't say anything until she finished. Thank you, Patricia, I said. You build a strong record, she replied. That's why we won. I sat in the garage for a few minutes after he hung up. Not celebrating, just absorbing. Jonah and Nora would come home to my apartment that evening. They'd eat whatever I made for dinner, argue about who got the remote, and eventually fall asleep in the rooms I'd set up for them with the specific furniture they'd each picked out from the store. That was what I fought for. Not the verdict. Not the vindication. Just that. It started with a phone call from Jonah. It was a Friday evening in late October, 3 days before what was supposed to be Priya's scheduled parenting weekend. I was in the middle of a production call with 2 of my editors when my phone lit up with Jonah's name. I excused myself immediately. Jonah didn't call me from his mother's house. He texted. Always. I picked up and heard road noise. Dad. His voice was low, controlled in the way he got when he was frightened, but didn't want to show it. We're in the car. Mom has a lot of bags in the trunk. She said we're going to Grandma Arena's in Memphis for the weekend, but she didn't tell you, did she? It wasn't a question. I kept my voice even. Where are you right now, bud? I-40 West. We passed the Bellevue exit like 5 minutes ago. Is Nora with you? Yeah. She's asleep. Okay. You did the right thing calling me. Stay calm. Don't let your mom know you called, and I'll handle it. I paused. Jonah, I'm proud of you. I heard him exhale. Okay, he said quietly, and ended the call. I was on the phone with Patricia Vane before I'd reached the front door of my apartment. Patricia had the duty judge's emergency line for exactly this kind of situation. She called me back in 11 minutes. 11 minutes that I spent standing in the parking lot of my building with my keys in my hand and my mind running through every option simultaneously. I have an emergency order, Patricia said. Judge Aldridge signed it. I'm sending it to Metro Nashville PD and the Bellevue precinct now. They'll intercept the vehicle. The kids are in the car, I said. I know. The officers are instructed to handle it calmly. They'll pull her over, confirm the children are present, and inform her of the order. No drama, if it can be avoided. It took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of driving west on I-40 myself. Not because I needed to be there, but because I couldn't sit still. Patricia called me when it was done. Priya had been pulled over near the Dixon County line. The officer had been professional. She had not been arrested. The order required she return the children to Nashville and surrender her passport, pending the full custody hearing. She had complied without incident, which Patricia told me was legally smart, even if it was personally humiliating. I turned around at a rest stop and drove back. I met Jonah and Nora at Patricia's office, where they'd been brought by a family services officer while Priya's situation was processed. Nora was awake by then, sitting on a leather couch eating a granola bar someone had found for her, looking more annoyed than frightened. Jonah was standing near the window with his arms crossed, watching the parking lot. When I walked in, Nora climbed off the couch and walked into my side without a word. I put my arm around her and held on. Jonah looked at me and said, "I knew something was wrong when she packed the good suitcases." I almost laughed. 13 years old and reading luggage as evidence. He was going to be formidable someday. I took them home. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup, Nora's specific request, and we watched half of an animated film before she fell asleep on the couch, and Jonah retreated to his room. I sat in the kitchen afterward with a cup of coffee and the quiet understanding that what Priya had just done had changed her legal position irrevocably. Patricia confirmed it the following Monday. Judge Aldridge's response to the attempted relocation was swift and unambiguous. Priya's parenting time was reduced to supervised visits pending the full proceedings. Her attorney, Stuart Colby, filed an objection that Judge Aldridge denied in 4 sentences. And in the background, moving quietly through the machinery of federal law, the DA's office had received Doug's referral on the shell company fraud. An investigator had made contact with Doug the previous week. That process would take months, but it had started, and it was going to reach its conclusion whether Priya was in Nashville or Memphis or anywhere else she thought she could run to. That evening I sat at the kitchen table while both kids were doing homework and thought about how close I'd come to losing them. Not in the dramatic way, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet, ordinary way that happens when someone simply drives away and doesn't come back. Jonah had stopped that. A 13-year-old boy with a phone and the presence of mind to use it. I made a mental note to take him somewhere he'd actually enjoy. His choice? No agenda. He picked rock climbing. Of course he did. For months later, Nashville was cold and gray in the way it gets in February, when the city can't decide whether it wants to be Southern or Midwestern about winter. The fraud case against Priya and the ZW Advisory Group had moved into formal investigation. The DA's office had interviewed Doug twice and requested additional documentation from our accountant. Priya's attorney had advised her to stop talking publicly about anything related to the case, which meant the stream of increasingly erratic voicemails I'd been receiving had finally gone quiet. Zane Whitfield had settled the defamation suit out of court. Carl Briggs negotiated a figure that I put directly into a college fund for Jonah and Nora without announcing it to anyone. Gerald Whitfield had reportedly cut off financial support to Zane's consulting business entirely following the showcase collapse. As far as I could tell, Zane was attempting to rebuild something smaller and quieter in another city. I wish him exactly as much luck as he deserved. The divorce was finalized in January. The asset division took longer than it should have, primarily because Priya's attorneys tried 3 separate maneuvers to reclassify portions of my business revenue as marital property. Each one failed. Patricia secured the custody arrangement we'd won at the preliminary hearing as the permanent order. Primary physical custody to me. Scheduled parenting time for Priya. Supervised until the fraud proceedings concluded. The company had a strong quarter. 2 new podcast clients, a live event deal with a regional music festival that I've been courting for 18 months, and a speaking engagement referral that turned into a consulting contract. The brand partner Zane had Poison had all returned, 3 of them with apologies that I accepted without ceremony. The work was good. The team was solid. Life, in the professional sense, had not only recovered but moved forward. The kids were doing well. Jonah had joined a robotics club at school and came home on meeting days with paint on his hands and opinions about circuit design. Nora had decided she wanted to be a marine biologist or a country singer, and she wasn't ruling anything out. She'd also started keeping a journal, filling it with drawings and observations about the world in the specific, earnest way of 9-year-olds who were paying close attention. On a Saturday in mid-February, I took them both to the Tennessee Aquarium in Chattanooga. Nora's idea. She'd been asking since November, and I'd finally cleared the calendar. We drove down early, Nora narrating the highway landscape the entire way while Jonah read, and occasionally looked up to correct a factual error in whatever she was saying. The aquarium was everything she'd hoped for. She stood in front of the jellyfish tank for a solid 12 minutes without speaking, which may have been the longest she'd gone without speaking since birth. Jonah got genuinely absorbed in a river otters exhibit and tried to explain otter territorial behavior to Nora with the focused intensity he brought to everything he cared about. I stood back and watched them. On the way home, Nora fell asleep in the back seat before we'd left the Chattanooga city limits. Jonah stayed awake, watching the highway scroll past in the dark. About an hour into the drive, he said, without turning from the window, "Dad, I think things are better now." I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." He nodded and went back to the window. I drove the rest of the way home, listening to the road and my daughter breathing in the back seat. And I thought about what it takes to rebuild something after it's been taken apart. Not the legal mechanics of it, not the strategy, just the daily, unglamorous work of showing up, making dinner, helping with homework, watching animated films you've already seen, being present for the ordinary moments that aren't memorable except that they're everything. I'd spent 12 years building a marriage that turned out to be built on someone else's terms. I wasn't doing that again. Whatever came next, and there'd be a next, someday, when the time was right, it would be built on ground I'd chosen and clear myself. The Nashville skyline appeared on the horizon. I took the exit I knew by heart and drove my children home.